Participium Prasens. So let's say a few things about the present participle and some things that we need to know about the present participle that we don't already know from our knowledge of the English participle. So in Gildersleeve Lodge, one of the standard grammars, we have that number 664. Participles are used in Latin even more extensively than in English to express a great variety of subordinate relations, such as. And what are subordinate relations? Well, those are the ideas or the verbal ideas that depend on or are related to or are relative to the main verb. So the main verb in the sentence, that's where the action's at. That's the main story. And then the participle gives us a little bit more information, but that's sort of related to or relative to the main verb. So we'll look at some examples and see have a better idea for what that means. So what are some of these subordinate relations? Well, time and circumstance, when something happened, or the circumstance in which the main verb happens. Cause and occasion. Why does the main verb happen? The participle could tell us about that. It can. Condition and concession. It can be that despite what the participle is telling us, the main verb happens. Okay, so even though the participle is, whatever action that expresses is going on, the main verb happens. So we have these three things. We have circumstance, we have cause, we have concession. So those three C's there, we can remember those. And the other thing that we should remember is that there's not a hard and fast way many times to distinguish between them. Now obviously cause and concession are opposites, but sometimes these things will blend together. Circumstance and cause blends, with can blend together, circumstance and concession and so forth. The time and the cause, okay. So the classification cannot always be exact as one kind blends with another. So let's look at some examples. Here's a use of the present participle, moriens, which captures this idea of time when, and these are examples that I'm taking out of Gildersleeve Lodge. So we don't know all of the vocabulary here, but let's walk through this. Alexander moriens annulum suum dat perdice. So Perdiccas was one of his generals, and this sentence says, Alexander, as he is dying, gives his ring annulum suum to Perdiccas. Okay. So the participle we could just translate as, Alexander dying, or the dying Alexander gives his ring to Perdiccas. But it might be nice to do a little bit more with this participle and build in a when or an as. When he is dying, Alexander gives his ring to Perdiccas. As he is dying, Alexander gives his ring to Perdiccas. At that time, in that circumstance, the circumstance of his dying, then the action of the main verb takes place. He gives the ring to Perdiccas. We also have the cause why. Areopagite damnaverunt puerum cotonicum oculos eruentem. So the Areopagites, those guys that get together on the Areopagus, the judges there, they condemned, damnaverunt puerum, they condemned a boy. And then that participle tells us something more about the boy. So eruentem is our participle here. Eruere, to pluck out, to pull out. So they condemned a boy plucking out, pulling out the eyes of quails. And if we just leave it like that, very simple with the ing in English, we might be a little bit confused. What exactly is going on here? Well, the thought is that the most natural way to render this into English is to build a little bit more into that participle, which is just what the speakers of Latin understand the participle as being able to do. Well, we need to add a few more words in English to get clear on that idea. So here, the Areopagites condemned a boy maybe because he was plucking out the eyes of quails. This probably doesn't work here to say when he was plucking out the eyes of quails, the time when, or even the concession. In spite of the fact that he was plucking out the eyes of quails, the judges condemned him. No, probably the best thing to do is to say, because he was plucking out the eyes of quails, the judges condemned him. And finally, we have concession, where the participle expresses some idea of concession. So the action of the main verb happens despite what the participle is saying. So risus interdum ita repente erumpet, ut eum cupientes tenere nequeamus. We have a nice Ciceronian clausula there in the tenere nequeamus. Laughter, meanwhile, interdum, laughter, risus, so suddenly breaks out, ita repente erumpet, ut, with this result, eum cupientes tenere nequeamus, that we are unable, tenere eum, to hold him, cupientes. So there we have the nominative plural of that participle. That's agreeing with the we in nequeamus, that we, even though we want to, desiring, cupientes, desiring to hold on to this guy, to restrain him, we are unable to. So, can we say when? When we, as we want to restrain him, hold him, we are unable to? Okay, maybe. Because we want to restrain him, we are unable to? That one won't really work here. So this is a nice instance of concession. Even though we want to, we are unable to, because laughter so suddenly breaks out. Okay, so those are the three things that we should remember about the participle. We can always just translate it, well, maybe not always, but most of the time we can get away with a simple, very simple translation of the participle, and we don't have to sort of think very hard about what the context suggests about either circumstance, cause, or concession. But in other sentences, like we've looked at here, they give us occasion for doing a little bit more with that participle, and those are the three things it can do. It can express that circumstance, and more strongly cause, or the opposite, concession. Finally, let's look at a sentence in Orberg that we get at line 22 and 23 of chapter 14. Puer dormiens gallum canentem non audit. So let's leave aside the immediate context of the chapter and just look at some things that we can do with this sentence, just thinking about the ideas of hearing and roosters crowing and people sleeping. What does that sort of context suggest to us? So very simply we could say the sleeping boy does not hear the crowing rooster. Okay, sleeping, crowing, participles in English. But that Latin participle will also allow us, if the context seems to demand it or suggest it, to do a little bit more with that part, with those participles. So the boy, as he's sleeping, the boy, when he's sleeping, does not hear the rooster crowing, does not hear the rooster when he crows. Okay, so we could build in that idea of circumstance, if that seemed to be a good way to translate the sentence in English. Okay, we might also hear, this is a nice sentence because we could build in cause or perhaps even concession. What about this? If we say the boy, because he is sleeping, he does not hear the crowing rooster. So we might think, well, if you're asleep, then you have a hard time hearing things or noticing them. So the boy, so that dormiens could give us not just the circumstance, it does that, but it also even more strongly gives us the cause. Why doesn't he, for the main verb, out it? Why doesn't he hear? Well, because he's sleeping. All right, and then if we were to work with the other participle, canentem, we might use an idea of concession there. The sleeping boy does not hear the rooster in spite of the fact that he's crowing. So we might be thinking, well, if the rooster, just on the basis of the context, if the rooster is crowing, that should wake up a sleeping boy. But the sleeping boy does not hear the rooster even though he is crowing. And that would be the idea of concession. Okay. So those are some things that we can do with the participle, and that's more or less that's the focus. That's the biggest lesson that we need to take out of chapter 14.